Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Megan Glova. Doctors say more research is needed on perinatal depression. That's the updated way to refer to postpartum depression. Now, just like there's a stigma around talking about women experiencing this, there's new research into men experiencing it too. We're joined now by WRAL's Chris Lovingood, who's a new dad himself. Chris, congrats and thanks for being here.
Yeah, I just, we at, I think 3-week mark with little Jordy. So
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. So, a few weeks ago, I actually saw you post on Facebook that you were looking for people to talk about PPD. I'm curious what kind of response you got and if that gave you any insight into how common this is for both men and women.
So I won't share specifics to protect some privacy because they didn't necessarily give me consent to talk about it. But I had quite a few people reach out to me and message directly saying, like, hey, thank you so much for discussing this. It's a really issue. And I mean, just a lot of people who had struggling with just being new parents. And there were mostly women who reached out. That's not surprising. But reached out to kind of talk a little bit about some of the hardships they had. Some just wanted to vent. Some wanted to just kind of talk about why it's important that we talk about perinatal depression, which, if we, during this chat, say postpartum depression, we're using that interchangeably just because I feel like a lot of people know it more still as postpartum depression. But the response was very strong. Actually, one of the people I interviewed in my story, Allie Cullen, she was one of the first people who reached out and said, I want to talk about this. I'm in Wake Forest. Can we talk? I said, yes, please. I would very much like to interview you to talk about this. And she drove in. We talked more. So yeah, the response was definitely strong.
Fantastic. And how would you define PPD, or how did doctors define it for you?
Well, I mean, essentially, so when they used to refer to postpartum depression, it was mostly kind of talking about just what you experience after giving birth. But perinatal depression, to my understanding, after talking with some doctors, is talking about the period while you're pregnant and even afterward as well. How it's kind of, it doesn't just begin right after you give birth. It can happen as you're in the process of it, especially when your hormones are obviously experiencing some different levels, some heightened levels and such. So that can lead to obviously someone experiencing depression and anxiety as well.
Jumping back to Allie, can you tell us a bit more about her experience and what she had to say?
First of all, just sidetrack, we interview a lot of people. Allie, I think, is one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. Ever. And seriously, I've been in news for like a decade plus, and she's probably one of the best interviews I've had, simply because she was knowledgeable, she was self-aware, she knew her information. I happened to interview her after interviewing 2 different medical professionals, and I mean, this woman, she was just on it. But she talked a little bit about her experience, right? She has 3 little girls there, and she survived postpartum depression. It was daunting on her. What you see in the story that I did, I mean, it's only a fraction of our discussion. I wish I could have used more, but I mean, for her, a lot of people, they think about, like, when you have a baby, oh, it's so romantic, it's so awesome, and the glossy covered lens and everything's amazing. And no, that's not how it is for a lot of people.
It's a life change.
It's quite daunting. It's a life change. It's a significant alteration of how you do things, how the people around you do things, and it's in terms of people around you. I mean, your family and stuff. It's a lot, and a lot of people, women, men, etc. They feel that after this child has been born, it's like, oh man, am I going to be able to protect this baby? What if I harm the baby on accident? Well, I do this and the other. That's what she talked about. She even said, like, she couldn't leave the baby alone to go asleep unless she were in the room, like, because she was just afraid that something bad would happen to the baby.
Yeah.
And so and some people might hear that and go, wait, what? And like, yeah, man, because it's depression, right? Like, how often have we heard about there's a mental health crisis in America? And it's like, well, this is a subcategory of that, right? This is something that a lot of, which I feel almost ashamed to say this, but like, I wasn't aware how big of a problem it was. I knew it was an issue, but I didn't know how big of an issue it was until I started looking into it. And that's why I'm glad I even started with this story. Actually, the only reason I got this story was from Ken Smith's wife. His wife had given birth as well, and he had mentioned how the nurse caring for his wife had mentioned that they had been doing more research into men experiencing postpartum depression. This kind of sent me down a rabbit hole.
And what about the father in your story? What can you tell us about him, his experience, and maybe pushing past the stigma?
So I want to put a quick pause button right here to say one thing very clearly, because I don't think I said it before. So we cannot have this conversation about postpartum depression without talking about women first. Like that, even the way I structured my story, I think I even said that like verbatim, almost like
Yes.
that. This conversation is so critical to have because women are struggling with this in silence everywhere, right? And this is something that needs to be discussed. And yes, the aspect of men experiencing it is what piqued my interest because, as you mentioned, I'm a new dad. I was wondering how would I fare with being a dad. And I'll be honest, I've had some thoughts of like, man, am I doing this right? Or like he does like little baby grunts. Like if my friends say babies just grunt all the time, and I'm always worried if he's grunting, am I hurting him? No, he's just making baby grunts. Like I'm not doing anything wrong. But I've had those thoughts. But I mentioned that because my one of my biggest concerns is that people would not take this story seriously if I didn't mention that we have to mention women first at the top. Even in our social media post, I told our digital team, I said, hey, before you post this link up, I need this exact caption. And I made it very clear to tell people, read beyond the headline, because most people would see the headline where it's like, research into men experiencing postpartum depression. They'll roll their eyes. Oh, really? Men going through it? Yes, they're going through it, but we're not discounting how women are going through it. So I just wanted to put that in before I continued forward.
Absolutely.
Nathan Evans Jr., he's a mental health advocate. He is all about men's health. He's about men's wellness. He talks about this. He travels, to my understanding, and talks about this. And he mentioned how he was going through it, but he wasn't aware until after he talked to his therapist. Men go to therapy, by the way. But he talked about how he wasn't aware this was postpartum depression until his therapist said something like, yeah, he said he struggled getting out of bed some days. He struggled with adequacy in his mind. And his therapist basically was like, yeah, that's postpartum depression, man. And he was like, wait, we can experience that? And it's like, yes. And again, another person I'm glad that I talked to, because I feel like these people, first of all, I appreciate them being vulnerable with me, because this is not an easy topic, especially because right now it feels like we live in this oxymoronic dichotomy in America where we'll say we have a mental health issue, but then if people express their issues, they go, really? Like, suck it up. Particularly when it comes to men. A lot of men, we try to be a little vulnerable for a moment, and sometimes it's like, oh, come on. And some people would even hear this going like, well, how can men go through postpartum depression? And it's, to my understanding, it's the life change, as you mentioned there, but also I spoke with one doctor, Crystal Schiller. She actually is the director for the UNC Center for Women's Moods Disorder. It's like one of only 4 different inpatient units in the country dedicated to perinatal women experiencing severe depression and even anxiety and mental health conditions. But I mentioned her because she said that some of her colleagues did research saying that men went through hormonal changes with testosterone when they, after their spouse, partner, etc., has a child. And I think that's the key issue here. There is an alteration that is happening internally among people, men, women, and that is why the conversation needs to be had. And I was, again, unaware of how untalked about this was until I started having people reach out to me.
Yeah. Did you come across any other research being done about this, or any more specifics you can share on that?
So one of our good colleagues over at UNC System, or one of our media folks, he put me in touch with Dr. Sultan Hubbard, and he's not doing like a formal like, hey, I'm going to have a group of people come in, I'm going to interview them, etc. kind of study, but just he makes notes after he sees his patients, and some of his colleagues do the same, and they're essentially compiling what they're learning from their male patients who experience postpartum depression. And their hope is to put what they learn into a research paper to try to help people, not even just men, but like the familial unit, people who are, families entirely who may need that support, to get the research necessary to back the need for them to get more help, whether that's therapy or other sort of resources that they may need to have an outlet when they're experiencing anxiety, depression, etc., during the perinatal experience. So his stuff, it's not like, to my understanding, robust or anything. He and his team are just in the process of kind of compiling the information. But from what I understand, his desire is to make some change by talking with people. One of the things he mentioned is that, and I saw this, whenever women go to the gynecologist, typically, if they're with a partner, their partner's there with them. he says he's learning from talking with people that guys are never asked about. Like, hey, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Now, you hear that on its face, and I understand how silly it may sound when you go, why would they ask how the guy is doing? Like, she's the one who's doing the physical labor. Absolutely. You cannot ignore that. I'm not saying ignore that. But the point that he brought up was that you have to acknowledge that this is a life change for that person, too. They may also be having some issues. And so that was another thing that he mentioned about doing research as well. But ultimately, the goal, to my understanding, is so that resources can be compiled to better help people who are touched by the pregnancy experience to some degree, whether that's the woman carrying the child, their partners who are with them, etc.
That's good to hear. And you did mention therapy quickly, but are there any other ways doctors recommend handling PPD?
From my understanding, I mean, obviously talk to someone. I mean, therapy is a good start, as Dr. Schiller had mentioned there too. And I think just being open with your partner, if you have somebody, just tell them what you need. Hey, I'm feeling this kind of way. I need a little help. I need some resources. I mean, there is no shame in it. There is nothing. What was I going to say? Oh, it's okay to not be okay. That's what I was going to say. It's okay to not be okay. And I think bringing up the fact that you need help is important. That mom that I mentioned, Allie Cullen, her husband, she said that after she had given birth to one of her children, he said, "Hey, I noticed that you're kind of off. Your vibe is kind of off. I think you should talk to someone." And that's why for us, I think they called us the birthing partner. It's important for us to be cognizant, be aware of the needs of the person who is extremely vulnerable in our life right now and needs that resource. So pay attention, listen, and ask, how are you? And I always tell people, you never really understand the power of how are you unless you ask it.
Our conversation on perinatal depression continues when we come back. If we could just round out this conversation with why you feel this is such an important topic to cover and, maybe just what you learned from it along the way.
I think and this, I can only speak from a man's perspective, but I will say I have noticed there are a lot more men, at least in my circles, who are trying to be more vulnerable, trying to open up a little bit more. And they're met with, oh, that's not really an issue. Oh, really suck it up. And I'm not saying there are not things in life that we just need to be tough about. Like the existence is difficult. I mean, I think for everybody, but when you need to actually express that, hey, I'm not doing so well right now, maybe someone should listen. Going back to my example before, we live in this oxymoronic dichotomy where we say, oh, there's a mental health crisis in the country, but then also people speak up about their issues and they're met with, oh, that's not a real problem. That's not a real issue. Well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. But to kind of round off what you were just saying there, I think for me, I really wanted to just, I guess selfishly for me, I wanted to know if I was going to experience anything during this so I can be my best self. So I could, as Dr. Hubbard said, show up for my wife as best as I can. But also I wanted to make sure that I spoke with other people out there because we have this platform, whether it's this podcast or WRAL News, et cetera, where we can highlight serious issues. And I know that when this story goes out and when it's out and about and people share it and I see comments, et cetera, it's going to be met with eye rolls. I'm aware of that. That's why I was very specific in how I addressed writing it, how I voiced it, the voices I used in the story, how I structured the story. But we cannot say there is a mental health crisis and then not talk about it.
Absolutely. I can't ignore that. Well, Chris, thank you so much. Very important topic there. And it's just super interesting to hear about all the conversations you had about it. Thank you.
Don't worry. I'll keep sending you pictures of Jordy.
All right. Can't wait. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. You might be listening to this podcast on WRAL.com or the WRAL News app, but you can also find it on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow the show so you don't miss an episode. I'm Megan Glova. Thanks for listening.